And Indiana. My name is Gail Thomas. My pronouns are she and her, and I participate in the life of the church by supporting the worship team. We are a religious community of people with diverse beliefs and shared values. Our diverse beliefs are expressed in our 6 sources, and our shared values are expressed in our 7 principles, both of which can be found online together. Both can be found online. Together, we strive to grow spiritually, build community, and live our lives in the world. We are currently in search for a full-time minister. When we do not have a minister in the pulpit, we invite members or guests to share a special message with us. Today, our worship service will be led by Reverend Fred Niedner. Fred Niedner is the senior research professor in theology at Valparaiso University, where he taught biblical studies for 40 years. These days, he teaches seminars and adult education classes all over the country on Zoom, and provides resources for publications that serve the ministry of preaching. During this time of responsible social distancing, we are striving to maintain the authenticity of our services. So allow me to draw your attention to several parts of our service today. The bell you heard ringing was our actual church bell, which was recorded by Bob Allen. The chalice, which you see being lit today, is our actual chalice inside our sanctuary, which has been made possible by James Johnson. The music you hear is recorded each week by our music director, Jeremy Jacobson, and members of our choir. If you are willing and able, we invite you to leave your video cameras on so that your fellow congregants can see you, just as they would if you were physically present. There will be a time in the service when you will all be unmuted briefly to say good morning to one another. I have a quick announcement. We will be holding a special congregational meeting and vote today immediately following our service. We will vote whether to stop the search for a minister or continue the search for a minister. Prior to the vote, we will discuss our financial situation, the costs and consequences of this decision. Please plan to attend today after worship. We are currently streaming on Zoom, Facebook, and YouTube. Our service is recorded and will be made available for future viewing on Facebook, YouTube, and the church website. Let your Facebook and Twitter friends know that you are attending worship with hashtag First Unitarian Hobart. Now let's all take a deep breath and join together in a spirit of reverence while we listen to the prelude played by Jeremy Jacobson. Please join me in lighting our chalice The words are on the screen. We gather this hour as people of faith with joys and sorrows, gifts and needs. We light this beacon of hope, sign of our quest for truth and meaning, in celebration of the life we share together. We will now have a responsive reading. If you do have your hymnal at home, it's responsive reading 598, but the words will be on the screen. Barbara Langle will join me in reading the part for the congregation, which is in italics. May every creature abound in well-being and peace.
May every living being, weak or strong, the long or the small, the short and the medium-sized, the mean and the great.
May every living being, seen or unseen, those dwelling far off, those living nearby, those already born, those waiting to be born.
May all attain inward peace.
Let no one deceive another. Let no one despise another in any situation.
Let no one from antipathy or hatred wish evil to anyone at all.
Just as a mother with her own life protects her only child from hurt, so within yourself, foster a limitless concern for every living creature.
Display a heart of boundless love for all in the world, in all its height and depth and broad extent.
Love unrestrained, without hate or enmity.
Then, as you stand or walk, sit or lie, until overcome by dizziness, devote your mind entirely to this. It is known as living the life divine.
Please join me in singing the opening hymn, number 95, There is More Love Somewhere.
Until I find it, there is more love somewhere. There is more hope somewhere. There is more hope somewhere. I'm gonna keep on until I find it. There is more somewhere. There is more peace somewhere. There is more peace somewhere. I'm gonna keep on until I find it. There is more peace somewhere. There is more joy somewhere.
Please join me in reading the affirmation of faith. The words are on your screen. Love is the doctrine of this church. The quest for truth is its sacrament. Service is its prayer. And this is our covenant to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. Everyone will be unmuted for a few seconds to say a collective good morning to one another.
Good morning.
Good
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning, everyone.
Morning. I am not
Good
muted.
morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
You're not muted.
Morning.
Good morning, everybody.
Good day.
Good morning.
Andy, you're
Lily's purple plastic purse. Lily loved school. She loved the pointy pencils. She loved the squeaky chalk. And she loved the way her boots went clickety, clickety, click down the long, shiny hallways. Lily loved the privacy of her very own desk. She loved the fish sticks and chocolate milk every Friday in the lunchroom. And most of all, she loved her teacher, Mr. Slinger. Mr. Slinger was as sharp as a tack. He wore artistic shirts. He wore glasses on a chain around his neck. And he wore a different colored tie for each day of the week. Wow, said Lily. That was just about all she could say. Wow. Instead of greeting students or good morning pupils, Mr. Slinger winked and said, howdy. He thought that desks and rows were old-fashioned and boring. Do you rodents think you can handle a semicircle? And he always provided the most tasty snacks, things that were curly and crunchy and cheesy. I want to be a teacher when I grow up, said Lily. Me too, said her friends, Chester and Wilson and Victor. At home, Lily pretended to be Mr. Slinger. I am the teacher, she told her baby brother, Julius. Listen up. Lily even wanted her own set of deluxe picture encyclopedias. What's with Lily? Asked her mother. I thought she wanted to be a surgeon or an ambulance driver or a diva, said her father. It must be because of her new teacher, Mr. Slinger, said her mother. Wow, said her father. That was just about all he could say. Wow. Whenever the students had free time, they were permitted to go to the light bulb lab in the back of the classroom. They expressed their ideas creatively through drawing and writing. Lily went often. She had a lot of ideas. She drew pictures of Mr. Slinger, and she wrote stories about him too. During sharing time, Lily showed her creations to the entire class. Wow, said Mr. Slinger. That was just about all he could say. Wow. When Mr. Slinger had bus duty, Lily stood in line even though she didn't ride the bus. Lily raised her hand more than anyone else in class, even if she didn't know the answers. And she volunteered to stay after school to clap erasers. I want to be a teacher when I grow up, said Lily. Excellent choice, said Mr. Slinger. One Monday morning, Lily came to school, especially happy. She had gone shopping with her Grammy over the weekend. Lily had a new pair of movie star sunglasses, complete with glittery diamonds and a chain like Mr. Slinger's. She had 3 shiny quarters. And best of all, she had a brand new purple plastic purse that played a jaunty tune when it was opened. Lily wanted to show everyone. Not now, said Mr. Slinger. Listen to our story. Lily had a hard time listening. Lily really wanted to show everyone. Not now, said Mr. Slinger. Let's be considerate of our classmates. Lily had a hard time being considerate. Lily really wanted to show everyone. Not now, said Mr. Slinger. Wait until recess or class sharing time. But Lily could not wait. The glasses were so glittery, the quarters were so shiny, and the purse played such nice music, not to mention how excellent it was for storing school supplies. Look, Lily whispered fiercely. Look, everyone, look what I've got. Everyone looked, including Mr. Slinger. He was not amused. I'll just keep your things at my desk until the end of the day, said Mr. Slinger. They'll be safe there, and then you can take them home. Lily's stomach lurched. She felt like crying. Her glasses were gone. Her quarters were gone. Her purple plastic purse was gone. Lily longed for her purse all morning. She was even too sad to eat the snack Mr. Slinger served before recess. That afternoon, Lily went to the light bulb lab. She was still very sad. She thought and she thought and she thought, and then she became angry. She thought and she thought and she thought some more, and then she became furious. She thought and she thought and she thought a little bit longer, and then she drew a picture of Mr. Slinger. Big, fat, mean Mr. Stealing teacher, wanted by FBI. I do not want to be a teacher when I grow up. Right before the last bell rang, Lily sneaked the drawing from Mr. Slinger's book bag, into Mr. Slinger's book bag. When all the students were buttoned and zipped and snapped and tied and ready to go home, Mr. Slinger strolled over to Lily and gave her purple plastic purse back. It's a beautiful purse, said Mr. Slinger. Your quarters are nice and jingly, and those glasses are absolutely fabulous. You may bring them back to school as long as you don't disturb the rest of the class. I do not want to be a teacher when I grow up, Lily said as she marched out of the classroom. On the way home, Lily opened her purse. Her glasses and quarters were inside, and so was a note from Mr. Slinger. It said, "Today was a difficult day. Tomorrow will be better." There was also a small bag of tasty snacks at the bottom of the purse. Lily's stomach lurched. She felt like crying. She felt simply awful. Lily ran all the way home and told her mother and father everything. Instead of watching her favorite cartoons, Lily decided to sit in the uncooperative chair. I'll stay here a million years for Mr. Slinger. Why does everything happen to me? 1051, 1052, 1099. That night, Lily drew a new picture of Mr. Slinger and wrote a story about him too. Lily was really sorry. So everyone forgave her, even her parents, even her stinky baby brother, even her especially incredible teacher. Lily's mother wrote a note, and Lily's father baked some tasty snacks for Lily to take to school the next day. I think Mr. Slinger will understand, said Lily's mother. I know he will, said Lily's father. And the next morning, Lily got to school early. These are for you, Lily said to Mr. Slinger, because I'm really sorry. Mr. Slinger read the story, and he looked at the picture, and he read the note, and he sampled the snacks. Wow, said Mr. Slinger. That was just about all he could say. Wow. What do you think we should do with this? Asked Mr. Slinger. And he showed her the note that she had written at first. Could we just throw it away? Asked Lily. Excellent idea, said Mr. Slinger. During sharing time, Lily demonstrated the many uses and unique qualities of her purple plastic purse, her shiny quarters, and her glittery movie star sunglasses. Then she did a little performance using them as props. It's called interpretive dance, said Lily. Mr. Slinger joined in. Wow, said the entire class. That was just about all they could say. Wow. Throughout the rest of the day, Lily's purse and quarters and sunglasses were tucked safely inside her desk. She peeked at them often, but did not disturb a soul. Right before the last bell rang, Mr. Slinger served Lily's snacks to everyone's delight. What do you want to be when you grow up? Asked Mr. Slinger. A teacher, everyone responded. Lily's response was the loudest. Excellent choice, said Mr. Slinger. As the pupils filed out of the classroom, Lily held up her purple plastic purse close to her heart. Mr. Slinger was right. It had been a better day. Lily ran and skipped and hopped and flew all the way home. She was so happy, and she really did want to be a teacher when she grew up. That is, when she didn't want to be a dancer or a surgeon or an ambulance driver or a diva or a pilot or a hairdresser or a scuba diver. The end.
At this time, we will have our joys and sorrows. Unable to gather in person, this congregation expresses our greatest joys and deepest sorrows in new ways. We believe that a joy shared is magnified and a sorrow shared is diminished. We pause, listening to what arises from within our hearts. Type in the chat box any joys or concerns you have. Your joys and concerns are not made public and are not recorded. If the chat box is not visible to you, click chat at the bottom of your computer screen. Or if you are on a phone, click participants, then chat. We lift up these joys and sorrows, including those too tender to mention. Our reading today is from 1 Corinthians chapter 13, verses 1 through 8. If I speak in tongues of mortals and of angels, but do not have love, I am a noisy gong or a clanging cymbal. And if I have prophetic powers and understand all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have all faith so as to move or remove mountains, but do not have love, I am nothing. If I give away all my possessions, and if I hand over my body so that I may boast, but do not have love, I gain nothing. Love is patient, love is kind. Love is not envious or boastful or arrogant or rude. It does not insist on its own way. It is not irritable or resentful. It does not rejoice in wrongdoing, but rejoices in truth. It bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. Love never ends. And now we will hear from Reverend Fred Niedner.
Well, thank you very much for this invitation to join you once again in this season. I'm grateful to see and be with you. Like the rest of you, I've learned to live with cyber togetherness via Zoom. But even us introverts will be happy to be together again in person, face to face, and singing. My announced topic, becoming Ḥesed, that's how you pronounce that word in Hebrew, Ḥesed. It grew out of thinking about your theme for this month, becoming, and specifically, it grew out of some of the materials that Maggie sent me that contain suggestions for worship planning and for the children's educational sessions that you have. Since Easter fell at the beginning of this month, the materials, for example, for grades 2 to 5 began with that, with Easter, and specifically with a discussion titled, How Jesus Became Resurrected, which he did, the outline explains, by, quote, letting go of being human and after enduring crucifixion, becoming an idea and a community, unquote. That's not exactly how I would explain it or preach it, but I understand this explanation and point of view. But before I say more, I'll share that the second piece that caught my eye was the suggested use in the worship material suggestions, the use of Marjorie Williams' famous children's book, The Velveteen Rabbit, which has the subtitle, How Toys Become Real, and maybe that's been used in your worship in a previous week or will later on this month, I don't know. I was amazed when I looked that up and reviewed it again, that that book appeared in 1922, so it's almost a century old. If you know the book, you know that it teaches that you become real, not by having amazing capacities and a fancy appearance of some kind, but partly by being loved. And also, because of being loved so much, partly by getting totally worn out and used and sat on and spilled on and snagged and ripped and having your parts borrowed for other purposes. If I were in my own, a church of my own tradition this morning, the lesson we'd have all heard on this Sunday, because we hear it every year on the Sunday after Easter, would be a story about Jesus' disciples cowering in a secret hiding place a couple of days after his death, with rumors flying about his tomb being found empty. And they're frightened and wondering what will become of them or what they might become, and suspecting that the answer will be next in line for crucifixion. And then, without warning, the way the story goes, Jesus appears in their midst. And then they're frightened in a new way and they can't believe their eyes. So what does Jesus do to identify himself and calm them a bit? He shows them his hands, those forever ruined hands, still with those awful nail holes. Whoever he is now and whatever he has become, he's got something very much in common with the Velveteen Rabbit. He's been used up, worn out, spat on, ripped, and lost a few parts. And now we find that he'll always look that way, even resurrected, whatever that means. The wounds and scars are better and truer than any ID card. They tell a story, like the story of the boy and the toy rabbit, who got the boy through everything from sleepless nights and bad dreams to scarlet fever. The reading I chose for today that you've already heard comes from the Bible too, another part of the Christian scriptures, this one from a letter of a fellow named Paul to a group of his friends and fellow Christians in the ancient city of Corinth. It's the longest and most well-known description of love in the Bible. I'll repeat just a few lines of that. Here's what Paul says, how you can tell true love. Love is patient. Love is kind. Love is not envious or boastful or arrogant or rude. It does not insist on its own way. It is not irritable or resentful. It does not rejoice in wrongdoing, but rejoices in truth. It bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. Love never ends, says the translation, but that word for ends is really a word that means gives up. Love never quits. Love never gives up. If you've heard that reading before, I guess you heard it at a wedding. I've read it while officiating at dozens of weddings of brides and grooms who chose these words for the ceremony on their big day. But the older I've gotten, the more convinced I've become that those couples, most of them quite young, don't have a clue what they're getting into, and not very much about what love is either, at least if we mean love that's been tested and wounded and wept all night and somehow stuck it out and stayed faithful and found its deepest meaning simply in being together with the beloved. But you can't tell people that on their wedding day, so I don't bring that up because they're in love. Maybe no longer totally infatuated, given all the hassles and expenses of a wedding nowadays. That does tend to take the bloom off of things. But they're still full of passion and desire and romance and dreams. But love that's patient, kind, never jealous or boastful, does not need to be the one who's right all the time. Ha! You can only hope with them that they'll be wounded often enough without actually dying, so they'll become embodiments of the kind of love that keeps humankind from finally destroying itself and everything else. Those words Paul wrote about love weren't addressed to a bride and groom, but to a community that had fallen to fighting with each other and competing over most everything, holding grudges, dissing each other, as we say nowadays, and trying to handle the antics of some of their number who were off the wall full of themselves. All the friendship and all the passion in the world wouldn't help them stay together. They needed to learn, to practice, to become something else, another kind of love. The kind of love that the ancient Jewish community called Ḥesed. Hebrew has another word for love, a kind of catch-all that gets used for everything from the command to love your neighbor as yourself to what we would call lust or even unhealthy obsession. Ḥesed, however, the thing or the power that can hold a community together, is one of those words that no single English word can translate adequately. And I believe that when Paul, the Jew, wrote this famous piece about love to some Greek-speaking people and had to use the only words they had for love, he was really trying to describe Ḥesed. Ḥesed is kind, unselfish, humble. It seeks the welfare of the other as zealously as one's own. It won't betray another, but keeps commitments and covenants, spoken and unspoken. Family commitments, community commitments, and perhaps the most basic and sacred commitment it honors is the covenant of our shared humanity. Nowadays, if you go looking for stories of people whose actions embody Ḥesed, you end up looking at mostly Jewish literature, obviously, since hardly anyone else uses the word. And one of the names you encounter most frequently is Emanuel Levinas. Born in 1906 and died in 1995, he was a Lithuanian Jewish philosopher and Holocaust survivor who joined anti-Nazi resistant forces in the lead up to World War II. But early on, his unit was captured and he spent most of the Nazi years imprisoned in the Jewish barracks of a German POW camp. And he only survived because somehow or another he was never taken to a concentration camp. I'm no philosopher and I can't begin to summarize his overall philosophy and body of work, but to me his most profound teaching had to do with ethics, which he worked out during his time in the hardship of prison as he observed how people, other prisoners, guards, Nazi officers, behaved toward each other in the microcosm of the POW camp, which can be a very cruel place. His experience taught him, and this is what he wrote most about and what he's best known for, that the most essential human experience is to look into another human being's face. Faces tell the ultimate truth. If you look at the face and not the clothing or the passport or the CV or anything else about a person, you see the truth of the other's humanity. But you also see reflected in that face your own humanity. And in that experience, you see as well your common connection to all of humankind and to the meaning of this vast, mysterious universe in which each of us has but a brief time to be a human being on this earth, a stretch of years that fly by like a dream. Levinas asserted that truly looking into another's face calls out from us, summons from us a faithfulness to the covenant of humanity that we hold in common. And that faithfulness takes the form of compassion, kindness, patience, and reverence, or in Hebrew, Ḥesed. Those young married couples looking into each other's eyes as they take their marriage vows, they know Ḥesed, but not quite the same way they will know it if they stick things out together for 30 or 40 or 50 years or more, when they've seen each other through goodness knows how much pain and sorrow, sorting through the wreckage of what even good, well-meaning people can sometimes inflict on each other, until they finally find that the sweetest, most meaningful things they do and have come from somehow remembering each other's whole life in every moment, looking at each other's faces and still seeing the child that lives in each of us, the child full of innocent hope and a desire to be loved and held and known, truly known. That's Ḥesed at work. But it's not merely a phenomenon critical to life in families and marriage. It happens in the marketplace and in emergency rooms and on the world's highways and byways. Moreover, Ḥesed is likely the only hope we have to overcome the malignant, poisonous polarization that has gripped our culture and rendered us incapable of seeing each other's humanity, unless everyone flies the same flag or votes as we do. I don't really know how to talk about this except by telling a story or two. One of them I've known all my life, and the other I found only this past week as I went looking for the writings of others who know about Emmanuel Levinas's work. I'll share this later one, the new one, first. I found it in a blog site where family medicine physicians discuss the critical nature of face-to-face contact with patients. And there, a physician named Jennifer Edgoose shared the story of working among Hispanic refugees on the United States southern border. And I quote now, she's telling the story of something she experienced. We had nothing in common. She was from a small indigenous tribe in Mexico called the Triqui. We couldn't find a Triqui interpreter, and my poor Spanish was no better than hers. Her face belied her age of only 17, due to years of work in the fields and suffering at the hands of an older man. She made the arduous journey north, arriving pregnant and undocumented, and now I was to be her doctor. Our worldviews were so different that even her way of expressing pain confounded me. I reverted to closed-end questions about where, when, how, and why, but still felt lost, gathering only incoherent answers and gestures. We struggled together during her gestation period, and despite being an experienced physician who can usually connect with challenging patients, I came to feel my heart sink every time I saw her name on my schedule. Toward the end of her pregnancy, tired of our inadequate words, I looked into her eyes and tried to give her hand a reassuring squeeze as we parted. And then, in broken Spanish, she asked me what I thought about the name Edgus for her baby. I was stunned into silence and eventually mumbled that my unusual last name would really not be appropriate for her expected daughter. That's the end of the quote. But let that sink in for a moment. That pregnant, frightened girl had at last felt seen, had at last felt herself being seen and heard and known. And she wanted desperately to remember that moment and its meaning, enough to name her child for the person who had embodied Ḥesed, who had honored her humanity, who had loved her. The other story is the one that most folks know as the story of the Good Samaritan, which is another biblical story, a parable, but also a story that happens countless times every day, all day, throughout the world and throughout our lives. One person lies half dead in the ditch, broken and left to die at the hands of robbers. And we all know there are many kinds of robbers. Sometimes they're other people, sometimes they're illnesses, sometimes just snowballing misfortunes. 3 different travelers come upon the scene. 2 pass by as quickly as possible. 1 stops to help. The story is simple. The truths within it are profound. But I want to read for you how a novelist, theologian, and teacher that I read quite a lot, a man named Frederick Buechner, describes what really happens in that story. Quote, "A third man did finally come along, of course. He looked, he really looked, and saw not just a man, but he saw what was actually sprawled out there in the dust with most of the life wailed out of him. He bound up his wounds, set him on his own beast, took care of him, and his reward was to go down in fame as the Good Samaritan, which seems to be a marvelously inept title somehow, because just as I prefer to think of the priest and the Levite as less than really bad, more just half blind, in the same way I prefer to think of the Samaritan as more than merely good. I prefer to think that the difference between the Samaritan and the other 2 was not just that he was more morally sensitive than they were, but that he had, as they had not, the eye of a poet or a child or a saint, an eye that was able to look at the man in the ditch and see in all its extraordinary unexpectedness the truth itself, which was that at the deepest level of their being, he and that other one were not entirely separate selves at all, not really at all. Your life and my life flow into each other as wave flows into wave, and unless there is peace and joy and freedom for you, there can be no real peace or joy or freedom for me. To see reality, not as we expect it, but as it is to see that unless we live for each other and in and through each other, we do not really live very satisfactorily. That there can really be life only where there really is, in just this sense, love. This is not just the way things ought to be. Most of the time, it is not the way we want things to be. It is the way things are. That's the end of the quote. And that love he's describing is Ḥesed, the love we learn from daring to practice looking into each other's faces, whether they're across the family table, in the marketplace, or even across the chasm between red and blue and all the other ways we have of making each other other. The more faithfully we keep looking at each other's faces and honoring each other's humanity in all its simplicity and all its complexity, the more we become Ḥesed, and the better chance we have to heal what's broken in us and in our world. As Marjorie Williams and the Skin Horse in her story put it, it doesn't happen all at once. You become. It takes time. And though you may think you've only become worn out, used up, stained, torn, and missing a few parts, you've actually become Ḥesed, and you've come to embody the life that's most worth living.
Thank you, Fred, for that wonderful message. While the music plays, please consider making a donation to help us continue our online services. Go to you can make an offering anytime after the service as well. For your prayers, your presence, your service, and your gifts, we are truly grateful. Please join in singing our closing hymn, What Wondrous Love, number 18. The words are on the screen.
What wondrous love is this, oh my soul, oh my soul. What wondrous love is this, oh my soul. What wondrous love is this that brings my heart such bliss and takes away the pain of my soul, takes away the pain of my soul. When I was sinking down, sinking down, sinking down. When I was sinking down, sinking down. When I was sinking down beneath my sorrows round, friends to me gathered round. Oh my soul, friends to me gathered round. Oh my soul, true love and to all friends I will sing. thanks unto the end. I will sing, I will sing. Thanks unto the end, I will sing.
When all the people, number 601. When all the people of the world love, then the strong will not overpower the weak. The many will not oppress the few. The wealthy will not mock the poor, and the honored will not disdain the humble. The cunning will not deceive the simple. Please join me in extinguishing the chalice. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again. Amen, and blessed be. Go in peace and wellness.